Hi, I'm Andrew. Let's talk about a surprising way that our minds work and how that affects our understanding of the world around us and our relationships with other people. For many of us, college is the first time we're in a situation where we live with and are in long-term close proximity to people who potentially see and make sense of the world in ways that are very different from how we see and make sense of the world. A perfect example of this is right in our dorm rooms. Imagine that your roommate, who is an otherwise great person, seems to have absolutely no idea how to keep your room clean. You look around your room and are overwhelmed and annoyed by how messy the room is. What surprises you is that your roommate doesn't seem to notice how messy they are. You ask your roommate to please keep the room a little neater, and your roommate seems to think that you're being a neat freak, that you're the problem and not them. How could an otherwise great person see this room as normal and acceptable, you wonder? Or, imagine that the tables are turned. You're doing a great job at keeping your room clean, but your roommate is constantly complaining about how messy things are. You know your roommate isn't trying to be a pain, but you look around the room and can't figure out how anyone could possibly think that the room is messy. How can two people look at the same messy situation or the same clean situation and come to such different conclusions? Who's right and who's wrong in these situations? The answer is not really about right and wrong. It's not just because messy and clean are ambiguous terms and people can apply them differently. The two of you are actually experiencing the same situation differently. And the cause of this difference is a phenomenon known as cognitive bias. In 2005, Henk Aarts ran an experiment where he asked two different groups of people to fill out a boring questionnaire, and then he gave everyone a cookie as a token of appreciation for filling out the questionnaire. The cookies crumbled some when people were eating them, with crumbs getting on the table and the floor, but there was a noticeable difference between the two groups. The members of the first group of people were 3 times more likely to clean up after themselves, gathering cookie crumbs, throwing away paper napkins and plates, than were the members of the second group. What was the difference here? Were the members of the first group from families that prized cleanliness? Were they surrounded by others who were told to subtly peer pressure them into cleaning up? Were they asked politely to clean up? Were they threatened with punishment if they didn't clean up? In fact, the members of this group had no idea why they cleaned up after themselves. They believed that they wanted to clean up after themselves. The explanation for the difference in cleanliness between the two groups was something small. The first group completed their questionnaires and ate their cookies in a room that had a faint smell of cleaning products in the air. The second group completed their questionnaires and ate their cookies in a room with no obvious smell in the air. This faint smell registered in the minds of the first group without them even realizing it, and since it was a recognizable smell, one linked to cleanliness, they intentionally cleaned up after themselves. Now, we usually think of ourselves as reasonable, rational, free actors. We take in information from the world, we think about it, we make decisions, we come to believe certain things, we act in particular ways. We think that unless our senses are being interfered with in some way, unless we make some huge error in thinking or deciding, we're doing what we want to do, and doing it because we want to do it. We also tend to think that we're pretty good at recognizing when we're being influenced or manipulated. Our paradigm examples of influence or manipulation are cases of overt threats or social pressure, of people intentionally misleading us, lying to us, giving us faulty information. Sure, we think, we can get things wrong or be led astray or be forced to do something, but unless we're very stupid or hallucinating or someone is playing a trick on us, we see things approximately the way they actually are, and we do what we do because we want to do it. But social psychology tells us a much different story. Even before we are consciously aware of the world around us, even before we take in information and analyze the information and make decisions based on that analyzed information, our minds are already working to unconsciously modify our perceptions, to control our analyses, and to influence our decisions. We don't approach the world with a mental blank slate that we generally think we do. Our minds are actively filtering information, highlighting some things, making connections, suggesting options, and we're unaware of all of this. Henk Aarts was able to make people clean up after themselves because he made their minds make those people want to clean up after themselves. Now, this feels contradictory to us. We standardly think that we are either free or we're controlled. But freedom and control are not mutually exclusive when it comes to how our minds work. Aarts wasn't taking anyone's freedom away from them. He wasn't forcing anyone to do anything. People who cleaned up after themselves genuinely wanted to clean up after themselves. But the explanation for why they wanted to clean up after themselves lay outside of their minds. And it was controlled by Henk Aarts. The psychological phenomenon that Aarts was exploiting in his experiment is what's called priming. Priming occurs when stimuli in a person's past or present environment predispose that person to see things a particular way, to interpret things a particular way, to come to particular conclusions, to behave in a particular way. Priming is by and large unconscious. We might be aware of the stimuli that prime us, but we aren't aware that they are priming us. We don't see or feel the actual modifications to our minds caused by these stimuli. Priming is one of the central types of cognitive biases. We oftentimes think of the word bias in a negative light. To be biased, we think, is to do something wrong, to ignore evidence, to misinterpret sources, to prefer one conclusion over another, and to do everything possible to reach that conclusion. Now, that is certainly one type of bias, but cognitive biases are a little bit different. To be biased is just to be inclined in one direction rather than another direction. That kind of inclination or predisposition is, on its face, neither positive nor negative. To be cognitively biased, then, is just to be inclined or predisposed to seeing, interpreting, thinking, behaving a certain way. And again, there's nothing on its face positive or negative about these sorts of cognitive biases. In fact, cognitive biases are both natural and inevitable. There's no one who exists, who ever will exist, or who ever existed in the past who does not have cognitive biases. To be one of us, with all of our amazing human abilities, is just to be the sort of creature that has cognitive biases. But the fact that cognitive biases are natural and inevitable, and the fact that on their own cognitive biases are neither positive nor negative, does not mean that we should just ignore them. Cognitive biases are remarkably predictable things, and this means that we can become aware of common cognitive biases and be on the lookout for them in our own lives. But this also means that self-interested actors can take advantage of our cognitive biases, for good purposes or for bad purposes. Suppose that I'm the owner of a clothing store and I want to make you buy a jacket from me. Now, I'm doubtful that you'll want to buy the jacket at the price that I'm selling it for, say $200, but I'm not willing to lower the price and I really want your money. Now, of course, I could just steal your money and force you to take the jacket. Or I could make you freely choose to hand over your money to me in exchange for this jacket so that you leave my store very proud of yourself for being such a savvy consumer. How can I do that? By playing on your cognitive biases and by priming you. I can make use of a specific version of priming known as the anchoring effect to make you think that $200 is an amazing price for this jacket that you wouldn't have purchased for that price had I not primed you. Here's how it works. I tell you that the jacket actually costs $1,000, but that I'm going to offer it to you for a super discount of only $200. That's an 80% discount. You're saving $800, and it will only cost you $200 to save $800. I have primed you by anchoring your valuation of the fair price of the jacket at $1,000. Who says that's the fair price? I do, of course. But whether you believe me that $1,000 is the fair price for the jacket isn't the point. It's just the priming stimulus. Now I offer you an amazing deal, a $1,000 jacket for only $200. You expect the jacket to be $1,000, that's what I've primed you to think, and then the supposed discount makes the actual cost of $200 seem like an amazing deal. Casinos have long made use of priming to make people spend more money and to be happy about it. How? For some little understood reason, people tend to spend money more when they're surrounded by the color green. Casinos take advantage of this cognitive bias by extensively using green carpeting. The green carpeting primes people to want to spend more money, and so they do. To see the power of priming and of cognitive biases more broadly, ask yourself this question. How would things seem to you if you were currently subject to the effects of priming? And how would things seem to you if you were not currently subject to the effects of priming? The answer is, they would seem exactly like this, like they seem to you right now. Cognitive biases don't change the content of your perceptions, they change what you do with those perceptions. Cognitive biases don't make you believe false things, they modify how you make use of the true things that you believe. Cognitive biases don't make you do things you don't want to do, they modify what it is that you want to do. We might think that we are doomed to live in our own little worlds subject to the effects of cognitive biases. But all is not lost here. Experimental research has also shown that the greatest defense against the effects of priming and against the effects of cognitive biases more broadly is simply to be aware of the existence of cognitive biases. Knowing that you are constantly being affected by myriad invisible ways your mind is changing and modifying things that you experience lessens the power of cognitive biases. So let's return to our initial scenario, your dorm room. You and your roommate are both subject to cognitive biases, and so you may never agree on whether the room is clean or messy. But what you can agree on is that you are seeing the room differently based on cognitive biases. Neither one of you is right, neither one of you is wrong. You're both experiencing the same thing, but you're experiencing it differently and coming to different conclusions. And so the way forward is not to try to convince the other person that the room actually is messy, or that the room actually is clean. Instead, the way forward is to recognize that you are both experiencing the room differently. And the point isn't to make your roommate see what a slob they are, or how neat and clean you are, because you're never going to succeed in this. The point is to agree on some concrete proposals for what's acceptable in your room, and to go forward from there. And you can apply that solution to any area of your life. Instead of trying to see things the way someone else does, or instead of trying to make someone else see things the way you do, instead of thinking that you're seeing correctly and someone else is seeing incorrectly, simply recognize that cognitive biases make seeing things the same way very unlikely, and then move forward from there with concrete proposals to address whatever issues you're experiencing.